In this video, let's go ahead and practice and improve our understanding of the associative, commutative, identity, and distributive properties together. For question 1, let's go ahead and do some matching here. So we have the identity property of multiplication first. So if it says multiplication, let's look for anything with multiplication in it. Also, identity means it's got to stay the same. So where are we multiplying something where it stays exactly the same? I think we're going to go with this one right here. 9 times 1 is going to be 9. The second one, commutative, means you're changing the order, and addition means we're adding. So we have to look for where we have addition as the operation, and the order of something is changing. So let's see if we can find that. So if you look at this first option here, we can see that inside this parentheses we have 5 plus 3, but over here we have 3 plus 5, but everything else stayed the same, right? The grouping is all the same as well. So let's go ahead and match this one right over here. The third one, we have associative property of multiplication. Associative is where we change the grouping, and multiplication is multiplying. So we have to see where we're changing the grouping here. If we take a look, we have to make sure the order doesn't change. So we have 6, 4, 5 and 6, 4, 5. But in this first one, 6 and 4 are grouped, and then the second one, 4 and 5 are grouped. So we can see we are multiplying and the grouping did change. So this one must be the associative property of multiplication. The next one, we have the commutative property of multiplication. So commutative means we're changing the order, and multiplying means we are multiplying. So let's see where we change the order there. Looks like down here in this bracket we have -3 times 6, but then here we have 6 times -3. So the only thing that changed here is the order of that multiplication. So we go ahead and connect those. The next one is the associative property of addition. Associative means the grouping is changing, and we're looking for addition as the operation. If you look here, the order doesn't change of the numbers. It's 4, 8, 3, 4, 8, 3. But the 8 and 3 are grouped in the expression to the left, and then the 4 and 8 are grouped for the expression on the right. So hopefully this makes sense. That's the associative property of addition. This last one here must be this one over here because it's the last one. But again, identity means what do we do so it stays exactly the same, and the addition means we are adding. So the only number we can add so that the value doesn't change is 0. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense, and just kind of going over these basic properties. All right. For question 2, let's go ahead and see if we can justify some of these steps along the way as we evaluate an expression. So we can see here that we have an original expression right over here, and we're going to use these values of A, B, C, and D and substitute them in. So from this step to this step, we can see that we are just substituting in these values. That's fine. Now, what happened from this step to this step? Well, it looks like the only thing that changed was we put in brackets here. Whenever you put in brackets or grouping symbols of any sort, that's really just going to be order of operations. So I'm going to go ahead and write that. Order of operations. Just because if we follow the order of operations, you would have to go from left to right, right? Technically, if you have all the same operations, you'd have to go left to right there. So we inserted those brackets right over here. How do we get to the next line? Well, the next line, they said commutative property of addition. So if you're following the order of operations, notice the only thing that's changing from this line to this line is that the order changed between the 9 and 4. They swapped and made it 4 and 9. So that hopefully that makes sense. Now going from this line to this line, the only thing that looks like is different is going to be that the grouping changed from 4 plus 9 to 9 plus 8. So the parentheses moved. Whenever the parentheses moved, that's going to be the associative property. Associative property. And what operation is this? This is addition, right? So we'll go right of addition. All right, awesome. So we moved the parentheses, so we changed the grouping or what's associated together. Let's see what's next. What's next, it says to get from this line to this line, looks like everything stayed the same except what's inside here. What's inside here are these parentheses, are the 9 plus 8 became 8 plus 9. So hopefully that makes sense for the justification. That's the commutative property of addition. Now how do we get from this line to the next line? Looks like everything's staying the same except for this 8 plus 9 in brackets here. The brackets moved over, so it's around the 9 plus -9. So what happens, or what's that called when we change the grouping? That's called the associative property of addition. We just said that earlier, so we just use that property again. So feel free to go ahead and just write that again. Okay. Next, what do we do? To get from this line to this line, it looks like this 9 plus -9 we just wrote as 0. So we really just evaluated and followed the order of operations and just solved. All right. All right, next we can see here that from this line to this line, all we did was write parentheses on the leftmost addition, which hopefully makes sense. That's just going to be order of operations, just because whenever you're inputting parentheses and just following the order of operations and saying we're going to do the thing on the left first here because they're all equal in importance, that's just following the order of operations. Next, how are we getting from this step to this step? Well, it looks like this 4 plus 8 was just evaluated to get 12. That's really, again, just following the order of operations and solving. And we need to write one more step here. We're missing, if we have this 12 plus 0, we really should write one more box down here and ask ourselves how we can simplify this 12 plus 0. Now, this 12 plus 0 really just simplifies down to being 12 here, right? So what's the justification for this? Of course, you could just say order of operations because we're just solving here. However, we can be more specific and use one of our properties, which is kind of the goal here, is use as many properties as we can if we can identify them. And so this one is going to be the identity property. And there's two identity properties, there's addition and multiplication. But in this case, we're going to say addition because we're adding, right? So if you add 0, it stays the same. That's that identity property of addition. All right, cool. Let's move on to number 3. Here we have another example, but this time we're going to use the different properties of multiplication instead. And the goal is to use the commutative, associative, identity properties. And it looks like we have all the justifications, but we just need to fill in some of the expression steps along the way. All right. Also take note that we have these 4 different values for A, B, C, and D. So we have the original expression. Okay, that's fine. And then the justification here says substitute the value. So let's go ahead and do that. A here is 0.5, so I'm going to write 0.5. I'm going to use parentheses to show my multiplication. I just think it's a little bit more organized. Then multiply by 2, and then multiply by 9. So there we just substituted in the values. Next it says to get from this step to this step, we're just following the order of operations, which makes sense because it looks like we just insert brackets here. You can use parentheses, that's fine too, but brackets are just a little bit more organized since we already have so many parentheses. This next justification says the commutative property of multiplication. So we must switch the order of something. Because we have these brackets, the only thing you can switch the order of are what's inside of them, right? Because you have to follow the order of operations. So let's go ahead and just keep these in here, but let's go ahead and write the -4 first and multiply by the 0.5 second this time, but keep those in the brackets, and then keep the 2 and 9 on the outside here. Okay. Next, how do we get from this step to this step? Well, it looks like they're saying the associative property of multiplication. Let's see if that makes sense. Well, the brackets were here, and now they're over here, right? Nothing else changed, just a grouping, and associative property means we change what's being grouped or associated together. Next, it says order of operations. So order of operations here would just mean that we're going to solve. We can just solve 0.5 here times 2. Half of 2 is just going to be 1. So I think we're going to have this -4 multiplied by 1 multiplied by 9. Okay. Next, let's see. How do we get from this step to this step? It looks like the only thing that changed was we insert these brackets here. They weren't there before, so that's the order of operations. That's fine. The next justification says identity property of multiplication. So we have to be multiplying by something and staying the same, which hopefully makes sense. -4 times 1 is just -4. So we can write -4 times 9. There we just use the identity property of multiplication. And then finally, the last justification here is order of operations. So if we just solve, this would just be -36. All right, let's move on to number 4. In number 4, we're going to go ahead and use the commutative property as well as the associative property, identity property, and the distributive property to evaluate this expression. So we have to make sure we can use each of these properties at least once here. So here's the original expression, okay, just like that. And then how do we get from this step to this step? Well, it looks like we took each of the values of A, B, C, and D, and we substituted in for their actual integer values here, right? So we can just say substitute values. Okay, so we just went and substituted in. The next step, it says distributive properties is the justification here. So notice this 4 on the outside from our distributive property, this A on the outside can be distributed and multiply it by B and C. So this 4 can be multiplied by the -5 and 7. So rewriting this, we can say this is going to be 4 multiplied by the -5 plus 4 multiplied by the 7, right? That's the distributive property. And then we're going to add this 20 on afterwards. Okay. Now, how do we get from this step to this step? Well, it looks like everything is staying the same in terms of these things over here. So the only thing that changed was how we got from this to this, right? So it looks like if you just followed the order of operations, you would have to multiply this first, right? Because there's two multiplications and the one on the left is going to go first here. So I think this is just going to be order of operations. Okay. All right. Next, let's see. How are we going to get to the next step here? Let's see. Well, the justification says order of operations. So that means that we must be following the order of operations. I think out of anything here, this would have to go next, right? This other multiplication problem. So I think this is just going to be negative 20 plus, and then 4 times 7 is 28, and then plus 20. All right, so we took care of using the distributive property already. We haven't used the commutative or associative or identity properties yet, so let's see if we can go ahead and do so. From this step to this step, the only thing that looks different is that these parentheses are now here. Keep in mind when you insert parentheses, that's just order of operations. And then if we go from this step to the next step, it looks like we're supposed to be using the commutative property of addition. So ask yourself, what can you switch here? Well, the only thing you can switch is what's in the grouping symbol, because the order of operations dictate that we have to go there first. So if we go ahead and use the commutative property, we can say this is going to be 28 plus negative 20. Let's go ahead and put another set of parentheses there and then write plus 20 on the outside. You can use brackets if you want to, if it's more clear. Now, how do we get from this step to this step? It looks like the parentheses were here, but now they've been moved. And so what property is that? That's called the associative property. And what's that of? That's of, it looks like addition, right? Because we are adding here. But the grouping has changed, so hopefully that makes sense. Next, the justification says order of operations. So if we follow the order of operations, we would just add these two together. Negative 20 plus 20 is 0 because they're opposites. We have 28 plus 0. And hopefully this makes sense. We've used each of the properties, I think, once except for one. So think about which one we're missing. We have distributive. We also have commutative. We also have the associative taken care of, right? So the only thing left is identity. And if you add 0 and it stays the same, this is called the identity property. This is of addition. All right, cool. So in this particular example, what we did was we just used our properties and wrote some expressions in as well as some justifications in. All right, let's check out another one. In number 5, we're going to go ahead and make sure we can use the commutative, associative, identity, and distributive properties again, but notice how we're given all the justifications, but we're not given any of the expressions here. So let's see if we can follow those justifications and fill in the right steps along the way. All right, first justification is going to be just having the original algebraic expression or variable expression. If we go ahead and substitute the values in, let's go ahead and do that. We have a is negative 13. And we're going to multiply this by what? Well, I'm going to use brackets just because there's so many parentheses here, but it's going to be 4 plus 9 inside here. And then we're going to add on 52 afterwards. All right, lovely. Next, we're going to go ahead and follow the distributive property. So that means this negative 13 would multiply by each of these values on the inside here. So writing this out, we would have negative 13 multiplied by 4 plus negative 13 multiplied by 9 plus 52. Okay. Next, we're going to follow the order of operations. So we don't need to insert any parentheses here just because multiplication has to go first. There are two multiplication problems here. We're going to do the one on the left, just going in order from left to right. So negative 13 times 4 is negative 52 plus, and then we have this negative 13 multiplied by 9, and then we have this plus 52 at the end here. All right. Next, we're going to follow the order of operations again. So between addition, multiplication, and addition, this multiplication is going to, for certain, go next. So following the order of operations, we're going to have negative 52 plus, and what's negative 13 times 9? Well, that's going to be 90 plus 27 is 117. So I think it's going to be negative 117, and then plus 52 here at the end. All right, following order of operations again here, let's see. Well, we have two addition problems. I think we're going to have to insert parentheses just because it says later on that we're going to use commutative and associative. You can't really use the associative property without having parentheses to move, right? So let's go ahead and just insert in. I'm going to use brackets here just because find them a little bit easier to see sometimes. Negative 52 plus negative 117. We already have parentheses here anyway. And then plus 52. So that's order of operations. We just kind of insert parentheses or brackets from left to right here, following the order of operations. Now for the commutative property, what are you allowed to switch? Well, we can switch what's inside the brackets here. So we can go ahead and use the commutative property and say it's going to be negative 117 plus negative 52. And ask yourself, like, why would we care about switching these? Well, if you think about it, we really kind of want to add this negative 52 and 52 together. Otherwise, we won't be able to get 0 to use the identity property. So hopefully it makes sense. We're going to try to get this negative 52 and 52 to be next to each other. All right, so next, let's see. I think the next step is the associative property. So we have to move these brackets, and it makes sense. We're going to move them so that they'll be around these two opposites so we can get 0. So if we use the associative property here, it'd be negative 117 plus, and then we're going to say this negative 52 plus 52. And now they're together here, right? And that's kind of nicely going to work out for us because following the order of operations here, let's go ahead and just evaluate what's negative 52 plus 52. That's going to be just 0. So we have negative 117 plus 0. And if you add 0 onto anything, it's going to stay the same by the identity property of addition. And so we end up with negative 117 here. All right, so there you have 5 different practice problems helping you kind of like wrap your head around each of these algebraic properties. Feel free to just kind of look them over again and retry any of them, but hopefully it makes sense on how we were using the properties and using them correctly to justify each of the steps that we were doing along the way in a very logical way. If you found the video helpful in understanding these properties a little bit better, feel free to give the video a thumbs up and share with a classmate or friend who might also find it helpful. And as always, keep up the great work that you're already doing.